I'm the type of person that I like to watch things in order, but I know that not everybody is, and that's not always necessary. But in this series, if you're watching this video, this is video 2, and you might not really get the full effect as we're doing a reflection series that builds one off the other. You might be missing something if you're starting at video 2 instead of video 1. So if you're doing that, I just encourage you to go to video 1. I'll kind of summarize it in a moment here, but again, I really encourage you to watch video 1 before you watch video 2. If you're watching video 2 after watching video 1, we're going to continue a next step here. So our first step was just asking ourselves, resistance-wise, when the question is posed that I might have a bias within my heart, prejudice, even racism in my heart, and I react a certain way. I get resistant or aggressive, or I deny it, or whatever the reaction is. Our questions are not really focused, at least not yet, on the facts of, is it there? Do we have a problem in our country, and all the different questions that rage around this debate of racial relations. Our question is more, is our heart in the right place? And so if I'm reacting in a very negative, reactionary way to just the idea that that's there, why am I doing that? The other thing to consider before we get into today's reflection here is I'm going to give kind of a preview for next week. We're going to deal with the question of how severe is the problem. And if I am demonstrating that it's not severe, why am I doing that? Is it really based on factual things, or is there something else going on in my heart? And I want to mention that because I'm going to mention an issue that is a big issue, that is a very debated issue, and it's an issue that a lot of people have a lot of feelings about. And if we consider this as a possibility, then it makes the issue quite large. So I wanted us to deal with the severity of the problem idea just briefly before we jump into that. And next week we'll deal with the severity. It just felt like I should go in that order for some reason. We'll see how this goes. But I want to pose another question to you. And again, what I want you to do is monitor your heart when you react to the statement I'm about to make. Because I'm not going to give you evidence just yet. We're not trying to settle the debate in this video. Our primary focus, and throughout this series, although we'll deal with some of the debate issues, throughout this series, what we want to ask is, what is the condition of my heart? Why am I reacting, feeling, doing, thinking, believing, speaking the way that I am when it comes to this issue? So, as I get ready to say this, you're possibly going to react in your heart when I make this statement for you to consider. You're probably going to react in certain ways. You're probably going to resist, like last week's video. You might want to shoot it down. You might want to just deny it. You might want to avoid dealing with the issue. And you might have had arguments about it before. But I want you to ask yourself, why is your heart reacting the way that it does when we make this consideration? Again, not saying it's proven that it's true. Just saying, what is your heart doing when we make this consideration, and why is your heart doing that? The consideration is there systemic racism? I'll take a moment. Your heart probably react. Why did your heart react the way that it did? Let's reflect through that. Part of it could be how we're defining systemic racism. Are we using the same definition in this discussion? And it's not that there is necessarily a law that you're going to find that says, hey, everybody, be racist. Mistreat people of other races. You're not likely going to find a law like that. It's just, the question is, the laws that we have, do they intentionally or unintentionally create scenarios that are not good for specific races? And even beyond just stated laws, the people that get to make decisions in our legal system, police officers, judges, governors, executive offices. There's different positions that people get to make decisions that are interpretive of the law, but they're not based in a specific law. And are those people making decisions that are bringing harm or creating inequality or an unfairness to a specific race? Is there anything wrong with evaluating that possibility? Not saying the debate is won, not saying it's been proven that there is systemic racism, not saying that every part of every system is racist, just asking, is there potentially a part of our systems, whether it's government, whether it's a business, some organization, is there a part of our systems that results in some form of bias, prejudice, or racism behaviors? Why is it wrong to consider that? And I keep saying this. I'm not saying that the debate is won. I'm just saying, why is it wrong to consider it? Because I so often see people shoot down the idea that that's there. But if it is there and we're not ever able to evaluate it, consider it, look into, investigate that it might be there, then how will it ever be resolved? And though you might say there's no evidence that it exists, do you have evidence that it does not exist? And just like evaluating my heart, that sin might not be in me, but I should always be evaluating. The Bible tells us to evaluate ourselves. I should always be evaluating, is it there? And it might have been there in the past, and maybe I got over it, but I should always evaluate, did it show back up? It might not have ever been my issue, but I have the ability to be tempted into a new sin issue, so I should always be evaluating, it wasn't there, but is it there now? And same with our systems. We should always be asking, is it there? Is there a problem here? Does this need to be evaluated? We push for other changes in systems. Why can't we just consider this? Again, not saying that it's proven, not saying that it's for sure there. I'm just asking about our hearts. Is there anything wrong with asking, is it potentially there? And I'm not really sure. One of the things that's confusing to me is that we live in a country that legally protected the practice of slavery. And though we might say that, well, that was a long time ago, that had the effect that it had in our country. The Supreme Court upheld it. Congress issued laws in favor of it. States did. And then after slavery was abolished, there were still all kinds of laws. You consider the segregation laws and the Jim Crow laws into the mid part of this century. And segregation was still affecting things all the way up till around 1970. And so we have seen that in our legal system before. Why is it wrong to consider that it might be in there somewhere? And you might have even seen funny laws that exist in different states, and I can't believe that's still a law. There are laws that are present today in different states, different counties, different cities that are decades old, that were created back in a time when there were racist laws. Why is it surprising that might still be in our system somewhere? So again, the question isn't, is it absolutely true? The question is, why won't my heart let myself just consider that there might be a problem in our systems? Proverbs 18 verse 17 says, the one who states his case first seems right, until the other comes and examines him. So when we hear arguments and debates, the last one usually is the most effective, depending on where our mind is, and the most convincing statement will often win the day. And so when it comes to this issue, have you actually looked at the evidence with the possibility that there is systemic racism? And whose arguments are you listening to? Are you listening to weak arguments on other side, or are you listening to the strongest arguments? Are you listening to the people who are the strongest advocates for either side and what happens there. And at the end of the day, did you just form an opinion, or did things get emphatically proven? And remember, we have a lot of systems. So just because I show and demonstrate that there is a place where there is a system clear of racism doesn't mean it's not somewhere else. And so we got a lot of systems to evaluate and consider. So proving one is clear doesn't prove that it's all clear. And one of the things I've experienced in my life is I used to start with the narrative. Now, what I mean by narrative, and this reflects on that Proverbs verse I read, I have learned about an experience that I call narrative, though I think it's not original to me, that idea of narrative. The narrative I have, that is the perspective I have before I start to evaluate the evidence, is often going to influence the outcome of what my opinion is at the other end of reviewing the evidence. So if my narrative is there is not a such thing as systemic racism, and I go in and evaluate the evidence, you know what's going to happen? And I've seen this over and over again. You're going to, at the end, still believe that there is no systemic racism. What happens if you change the narrative? Because my narrative used to be that there is no systemic racism. And so every bit of evidence, everything I saw, I would say it's isolated. I would say, well, that was just one rogue person, and I would find all different reasons why, even though I'm getting countless evidence thrown at me, I would find every reason why that doesn't mean that there's actually systemic racism. Why? Because I didn't believe that there was. And so it didn't really matter how much evidence was thrown my way. I was never going to believe that there was systemic racism. What happened was I had heart change. Something in my life persuaded me that I should consider that there might be systemic racism. And you know what happened? Now, when I considered the evidence, I could see that it's there. That doesn't mean that it's been proven, but when I see the stats, and I see the points that are made, and I see the stories that are mentioned, I see the laws, I see the history, I begin to see that, wow, there is such a thing as systemic racism. And again, not saying that that's proven. I'm just saying, what would happen if your heart went into this and said, let me consider, maybe this is a real thing, and let me start with that perspective. This could be a real thing, and then look at the evidence. I think that if you changed your narrative, you would probably conclude that there is such a thing as systemic racism. What I want you to do is make sure that you don't end up like the people that reacted to Stephen's sermon in Acts chapter 7 before he was stoned to death. He preached a sermon, and everybody was in full agreement with him until he said some things at the end. And when he said some things at the end, their reaction was, in Acts chapter 7, verse 54, now when they heard these things, they were enraged, and they ground their teeth at him. So they got angry, not because what the guy said was definitely wrong, but because they didn't like what he said. And then verse 57 says, they cried out with a loud voice and stopped their ears. They tried to do everything they could to no longer hear what was being said. If it wasn't true, and I have reasons to demonstrate it's not true, I should be able to hear that argument out and not change my mind because I could prove that they're wrong. But the idea that they didn't want to hear might be a key that demonstrates that they actually believe that what was said was true. And so they're trying to avoid the subject. They're trying to avoid the conversation, and they killed him to get him to stop talking. When you think of systemic racism, are you actually listening to the evidence? Are you actually listening to all the possibilities? Are you actually open to that it might be a real thing? And if you're not, if you're shutting it up, if you're silencing it, if you're dismissing everything that you hear as evidence, saying, well, no, that could be. And I wonder, how many pieces of evidence could come your way that you can keep dismissing? And if that's your heart, is your heart in a right place? Because what if our systems, or some of our systems, are mistreating people just because of the color of their skin? What if that's a reality? And I will never know that. I will never be able to do anything about that if we can't at least just begin to talk about it in a way that we're considering that it might be real. That's what I'm asking you to do. What's going on in your heart? Why are you reacting to the idea of systemic racism the way that it is? And should you be reacting that way? What I'm going to do in this video is I'm going to attach in the summary as well as in the comments a link to a video that was done that demonstrates some issues of systemic racism with some statistics and some different issues. I want you to consider it with an open mind. Let your narrative be that systemic racism might be real, and I want you to see what happens to you at the end of that video. And again, feel free to comment. In fact, I encourage you to comment, share, and like this video. I'm trying not to spread this video too much because I want to make sure that if people jump into this, their heart's actually open. So if your heart's open, I hope you will continue with me on this journey. Let's make sure that we're pure before God. Let's make sure of it. Let's not just assume it. Let's make sure of it. Let's have a open heart. God bless you.